Listen very carefully and follow my instructions. Prepare your brain for the Live Cortex Nootropic Podcast.
Welcome everybody to the Live Cortex Nootropics Podcast. This is 007, and the title of this podcast is The Interplay Between Nootropics and Entrepreneurship. This, for me, dates back years and years and years. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart, and it's something I can basically go on and talk about forever, which we're going to do here. I'll try to cut it short, but I have a lot to say about this topic because I think it's critically important, as we're going to talk about, for entrepreneurs to have good brain performance. And I think any entrepreneur can achieve that in a myriad of ways, and one of the best ways to do that is by taking nootropics. So we're going to get into that, how nootropics have helped me to build two companies, one of which is a nootropics company, Live Cortex, the parent company that makes the Cortex nootropics stack. We're going to talk about how every day my verbal fluency, my otherwise functionality, focus capacity, and more are improved as a result of taking nootropics, and how that allows me to run both of my businesses, but particularly a business that requires that I spend a lot of time engaged in that business, a lot of time engaging with customers over the phone and in person, and a lot of time hands-on doing physical labor with Apple products. The company is an Apple products repair company. We'll touch on the sort of ethical nature of taking nootropics as an entrepreneur, and why that might be a good idea to have the advantage over other entrepreneurs or competitors, etc., and why, really, from my perspective, it's not an unethical thing to do. And we'll also talk about the growing desire for nootropics and brain performance optimization from the perspective of entrepreneurs, specifically for performance optimization. People know that their brains are going to be able to work better. People know that if their brains work better, they're going to do better in their startup. They're going to make more money. They're going to hire better people because they'll have better judgment and a better interview capacity, or they set up a better interview structure where their brains are working well. Really, at the root of everything that we all do as entrepreneurs and in startups is our brains. It's the founder's brains. It's the senior level people's brains. And at the root of that is the performance of that brain. So if a brain is working well in the realm of performance, there's a lot that somebody can accomplish, and we can accomplish things rather quickly, a lot quicker than if our brains weren't working good. Baseline is very different than super optimized baseline with nootropics. So without further ado, let's jump into podcast 007 of the Live Cortex Nootropics Podcast, the interplay between nootropics and entrepreneurship. Coming up. I gotta tell you, having been an entrepreneur for 6 years, I will not go through the rest of my life without taking smart drugs. Aniracetam, piracetam, uridine monophosphate, Alcar, CDP choline. You can always have a better brain.
The Live Cortex Nootropic Podcast is about to begin.
All right, everybody, 007 on the Live Cortex Nootropics Podcast, the interplay between nootropics and entrepreneurship. This, for me, has, like I said in the intro, this is super near and dear to my heart. It's like I have discovered years ago when I first started taking nootropics, and I have to remind myself this all the time, and I come to this same understanding all the time, that my brain being better, having better performance, for me to access information and to work well, really just having energy and verbal fluency capacity, memory capacity, focus capacity, my brain being good, working well in all of these areas is the difference between me being successful and me not being successful. And I specifically mean financially successful in my life as an entrepreneur. I can make better decisions that lead to more money. I can sit and analyze a situation more and come up with more things to do, like pursuing SEO further with a company because we're in like the nosebleed section for some of our target keywords in Google. That'll equal more money. And in every other area of the company, whether it's the administrivia that one has to engage in on a day-to-day basis or on a weekly basis, or it's sort of getting deeper into administrivia, like looking at your finances and specifically how you can start saving money, looking at your profit and loss statement, realizing like you're spending like all this money with this, you got Grasshopper, the phone system, do you really need it, and this, trying to change things. Having an optimized brain to look at all that stuff really makes you, put you in a position to be able to make better decisions. And so it's critically important to have a fully functional brain when it comes to the operations part of running a business and being an entrepreneur. But then there's the creative part. There's that whole other part that I think a lot of people have an argument against nootropics, against thinking that nootropics are really just about focus and getting work done. But for meditators, for those of us that are meditators, nootropics help tremendously to put us in the zone. For me, when I take nootropics and then I sit down to meditate, I have a far easier time getting into that clear place. And once I get to that clear place and I've got control over my brain, it's like at that point I really can start turning on the creativity, and I can really start turning on the kind of brainstorm brain. When I sit down and brainstorm, it is far better and far easier for me to do brainstorming-like activities, which are really creative activities to get you to sort of think outside of the box and come up with new ways to approach things. I do it way better when I take nootropics. I can sit down, I can really get to brainstorming and a whiteboarding or something. I'll spend an entire hour whiteboarding and just branching things off, coming up with new stuff because my brain is working well, because I'm taking nootropics. Now, I want to take you back years and years ago to the beginning of one of my companies. The company is called iMobile Rescue, Inc. And at the time, I had a co-founder on with the company, and this was back in 2012, about 4 years ago. And we had this small little place, this small little office, which was in the bottom of a business building. It was essentially the ground level, the basement level, rather, of a business building where you couldn't really see us from the street. There were no signs on the street. We had to direct people down an elevator basically to the basement of this business building. It was professional. We had signs, and when you went down there, it was a nice office and people could come in. We had a big waiting room and all that stuff, but it was very, very secluded, very, very kind of isolated from the rest of society. So me and my co-founder would sit in this office in the beginning, because that's all we could afford is this office, and it just became available on this street called Broad Street, which is like a major street in the city that we had the business in. And I remember him talking to me about how he used to take Adderall, and he was having some focus issues in the beginning of us like running the company, and I was kind of wondered why and tried to help him through it, and we tried to kind of work it out. Eventually, that among other things led to us parting ways and him moving on to go do some other business stuff, and me continuing with the company. The company was my company to begin with. I invited him on board 6 months or so after, probably about 7 months after the company started, and then gave him 50% of the company and gave him the title CEO. And I was president at the time. Eventually we split up and went our separate ways. But before we did that, and as kind of part of that problem, his name was Nico. He was having issues. He was having brain performance issues and focus issues. And I would always be like, we would always sit down and talk about it. And I'd be like, man, we got to figure this out, because this is impeding your capacity to focus and do well in this company. And I feel like I'm sort of pulling a lot of the weight. A lot of startup founders run into that. It's like, the other founder you think is not pulling the weight, or one person is just like, a high energy person, the other isn't. And sometimes that's good. You got to find your balance. One person is the ant constantly building, and the other person's the lion sitting in the back in the shade and then pounces on something when he or she sees it. And that's a good balance to have and to strike. But sometimes if there's performance issues, we really have to address it. So in the realm of addressing my former co-founder's performance issues, we decided, let's get some nootropics and bring them into the picture. I really was into nootropics at the time, and I had sampled a lot of individual nootropics. Alpha GPC and Alcar were one of my favorites at that time. I had tried paracetam already, choline bitartrate, ashwagandha. And so I was all about it. I just had sort of taken a break from nootropics after a while, because I wasn't really that interested in it. It was cool to me. It just wasn't an everyday thing. And so we decided to get ourselves a couple stacks of Alpha Brain. We had some Alpha Brain shipped to the repair center, and we started taking it. And I noticed verbal fluency improvements, a little bit of focus endurance. I was a little more productive. My brain worked a little better at certain parts of the day. It was weird for me because unlike Cortex or unlike some of the other really good nootropics out there, Alpha Brain kind of was spotty. It would hit me pretty well here and there, and then I'd be like, am I really noticing it right now? Is it, and I'd be doing cerebral work to sort of be able to gauge that, but it just wasn't consistent enough, result for me, to want to take it consistently, and for that to be like the best nootropic ever. But nonetheless, it was helping myself and my co-founder a little bit to get better performance out of ourselves. For me, I'm a good responder to nootropics, and my baseline is always super optimal, and it was optimal back then. And so me functioning optimized above baseline from taking a nootropic, a commercial nootropic stack, was a good idea, and it gave me more verbal fluency, and it allowed me to function better when it was working for me. My brain was responding to the chemicals in the stack. And a little bit for my business partner. Remember, he used to take Adderall. So Adderall will mess your brain up probably and put you in a place where if you're taking subtle nootropics, it's not going to be comparable. Adderall is very, very hyper focused, super strong focused. kind of substance. I do not call it a nootropic. I do not call it a smart drug. We're not going to group it into that category because it really isn't, specifically in terms of all the side effects that comes with it. But nonetheless, people use it to focus, and that's an interesting thing. But for me, as I had really just gotten back into my experimentation with nootropics, I started ordering aniracetam and piracetam, different analogs of choline, acetyl L-carnitine, ashwagandha, and a bunch of other stuff, and kind of started mixing it together, trying to find my own stack, making my own kind of super stack. I was fussing with Huperzine A back in the day. And I got to say that, with the right nootropics, with the right experimentation, I was functioning better than my baseline, and it really started to help me to take my business to the next level. It started to help me in my confidence level when I would go into business meetings with higher ups and try to sell them our service. It would help me when I was talking to people on the phone in terms of my confidence level when I was trying to get people in for appointments. That was the whole basis of our business model at the time. We had not gone national, which we are now, and not had a whole lot of businesses on board. It was basically just local, where the phone rang, people said, "Yeah, I got a broken phone, I found you guys on the web," and we would try to sell them on the price and get them in for an appointment for us to fix their phone. And me having a better brain as a result of taking the nootropics that I was taking really, really helped. But it wasn't until later on in the company that this was, shortly after this, my co-founder left. I took over the company completely and just tried to scale it as much as possible. And really, it turned out to be a great lifestyle business for me and a great business to facilitate essentially the angel investment in the Cortex product and the Live Cortex business, which was my next business, a business I've been thinking about working on for quite some time. But through that process, as the business started to grow, and we really started to get some of the educational organization business, sort of B2B business that I was after, fixing iPads for schools at large scale, fixing iPads for corporations at large scale, fixing iPads for more people locally at larger scale. As we started to move into those arenas, it was really nootropics that helped me to have the verbal fluency to sell some of these people and to help me to brainstorm the ideas about how to approach some of these people, and really just put my brain in a place where specifically the tasks that I needed to focus on for a long period of time, where I could just easily do that. I totally attribute that to nootropics. Again, my baseline is great. I try to maintain a good baseline. That is what everybody should do. That's what I do. That's what people should do. But at the end of the day, it was really experimenting with and trying new and finding the right concoctions of nootropics for me really, really helped me to take this company along a little faster. Now, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm full energy. I like to get things done. I'm super ambitious. And so there's definitely a case for that springboarding my success as an entrepreneur so far, kind of fast tracking through business. I drove my first Mercedes at 29. I did my first 10K deal at 28. And I really started the whole thing right around 26 years old and became an entrepreneur right around 25. And so it was like in those early years, I became successful enough relatively quickly. I had all these sort of benchmarks for success as a young entrepreneur that still has a long way to go, but is like doing pretty well. And, it was those early days where I was fussing with nootropics that I think really allowed me to have a faster edge. I would have done all of this stuff anyway, and I think that's the distinction that's important to make. Nootropics don't help you become magic. You got to be pretty magic by yourself, but they certainly will speed up the process that your brain uses to be magic, and all the great things that you already do, it's going to make that stuff work faster and better, and that's an important thing. So I attribute a lot of my forward motion and a lot of the speed with which I've moved in business to having a better brain, and I attribute having a better brain to meditation, sleeping well, and taking nootropics for sure. Let's talk about entrepreneurs taking nootropics out there in the world. There is a phenomenon taking place within the realm of startups, within the startup community, of entrepreneurs taking smart drugs and nootropics to get ahead. In Silicon Valley over there, where it's like no holds bar and the competition is crazy, and these guys are raising $10, $20, $30 million more and are getting valuations of $100 million, $500 million, $1 billion, $20 billion for some of these startup companies, which, by the way, aren't profitable yet, a lot of them. But in that kind of dog-eat-dog world, in that sort of high-intensity competitive environment, a person's brain needs to work really well. And this is why people in Silicon Valley are resorting to heavy, heavy smart drugs and heavy, heavy compounds, the most popular of which you might imagine if you're sort of into this zone, or you're in a startup company, or if you're into nootropics in general, is a anti-narcolepsy drug called modafinil. Modafinil is very, very strong. It works on the dopamine system, the acetylcholine system, probably other systems too. There's a lot of mechanisms still not understood, but some we do get. And it's a very, very powerful drug. It's an actual drug. And so some people group it into the category of smart drugs. I guess I would I'm kind of leaning toward grouping it into the category of smart drugs just because of the sort of executive function improvements that you will in fact get. You'll get some verbal fluency improvements for sure. You'll probably have memory improvements, definitely processing speed improvements. And as a result, you'll be a lot more productive from taking it. So it fits into the realm of smart drugs for me. I think that even some of the what we think are extremely safe or extremely lacking side effects type of nootropics or smart drugs like aniracetam can have side effects for some people. It really depends on your brain chemistry. And so, I've kind of become a little more lenient with my understanding of my definition, my own personal defining of smart drugs, and I would say that modafinil could fall into that category. So there are a lot of startups in Silicon Valley that founders are taking modafinil to put them in that zone. Modafinil puts you in like a hyper-focused zone, sort of like a shark with black eyes. You're just ready to attack stuff, and you just want to focus and get things done. You're kind of just like not separated at all, not fragmented. You're all in one place and you've got the brain capacity to get stuff done. And then there are other nootropics. There are a lot of entrepreneurs for whom aniracetam and piracetam and some of the choline analogs with the racetams, oxiracetam, are basically a norm to help them to get them through the day in terms of performance. And that is really where we start to look at different kinds of nootropics in entrepreneurship, right? It's not just modafinil. It's when you've got an entrepreneur that understands the benefit of not just speeding everything up, like something like modafinil might do, but improving all of the various aspects of the functionality of what makes you good at what you do as an entrepreneur. If you're a good whiteboarder and you like to sit in front of the board and jot down ideas, and you like to connect things together, then aniracetam might be a wonderful smart drug for you, and people might understand that and get that. Entrepreneurs out there have figured that out and take drugs like aniracetam to help them to whiteboard better and to get more creativity out of themselves. So far, the Cortex nootropic stack has totally reached entrepreneurs. I know a really cool chick from, I think she's from North Carolina or South Carolina, who just religiously is buying Cortex bottles, says she loves it, says her productivity is super maxed when she takes Cortex. And it makes sense. Cortex is a stack that's not just stimulatory, because it is pretty stimulatory, but it's also improving upon areas of the brain that all have to do with the sort of back end of your productivity, verbal fluency, memory, focus capacity, all that sort of stuff, processing speed, right? Major components of the effects of Cortex. And so people seem to be getting a great kick out of that. And there's a contingent of startup people and entrepreneurs out there that are using Cortex as a way to get better performance out of themselves. But I think that fundamentally entrepreneurs know that if there's a way to improve brain performance and a way to make them able to focus more and spend time on the things that really matter, that help to move the ball forward in growing the company's revenue and growing the company's user base, etc., that they're going to do it. And nootropics for a lot of people are certainly that answer, which kind of brings me to this is a good segue to the idea of the sort of ethical nature of nootropics. And I think that this topic for me, I have a lot of history talking about this topic. I've thought about it a lot, and I've come essentially to the conclusion that having the advantage neurologically is no more a crime than attempting to take a pre-workout so that you can have the advantage when you go to work out, or drinking a cup of coffee in the morning so that you can get your brain to speed up a little bit and not feel tired as a result of the a binding of the caffeine molecule to adenosine receptors in the brain. That I think people really don't have examples of people that have optimized brain performance, and it's been a wonderful kind of evolutionary, honorable thing to do. People don't have too many examples like that. And there is a woman for whom this is the case. A couple people. There's the person who, I think her name is Rita something or other, who created Noopept. I've heard her give interviews, and she's had like 84, 85 years old in the interviews, and she's got the verbal fluency of a 20-year-old. And then there's also Rita Levi-Montalcini, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 86 or so for discovering nerve growth factor. She then took nerve growth factor via eye drops across the blood-brain barrier. That's the only way to get that substance across the blood-brain barrier, at least that we know of, for years and years and years, and had the intellectual functionality of a young college student late into her 90s. If you go on YouTube, Rita Levi-Montalcini, and watch her talk, it's pretty impressive. So we don't look at people like that and think like, oh wow, this 100-year-old lady had the advantage. She won the Nobel Peace Prize and she's cheating. We don't think of that as unethical at all. And I think that when it comes to nootropics, we have to think about that in a very similar way, because a lot of nootropics, you could classify them in that kind of same category as something like nerve growth factor. And we need to kind of pair the situations alike. I think people are inventing the idea that nootropics are cheating and that someone has an unfair advantage taking nootropics because they're doing better. People are inventing the idea because they think it's sort of is like this black box to people. It's like this, what is this nootropic stuff? What smart drugs? Are they the same? Are they different? Where are you getting them? They affect the brain. Their chemicals, are they safe? Are there side effects? We don't know. Then there's dosing, and sometimes people, if they really want to get granular about it, will get milligram scales and capsule makers and bulk powder and be making the stuff in their living room. It's like from the outside that looks very, very scary, and people really don't know what to think of that. And so since it's this black box sort of weird separated thing that nobody really has any idea about, people, what they don't know about, they start to get fearful of, and they start to make things up about. They start to talk about, right? You'll hear their irrational fears being voiced about a thing, and people think nootropics, you're getting the unfair advantage. This is a substance that you're using to cheat through life. To have better brain performance. And all of the perspectives that biohackers think from, and cognitive biohackers think from, and entrepreneurs think from, which are specifically, I want to improve brain performance to stave off neurological decline that's happening every day with stress, with aging. And some of the components of certain nootropic stacks are constituents of the human brain already that you might not be able to get from your diet, based on the fact that you might not be absorbing B vitamins, or you might not be absorbing some of these nutrients, or you're putting them in the brain in a much more bioavailable way, in a way that helps the brain to use them better, and thus you've got better functionality. What if we have figured out, as people who take nootropics, how to reverse the last 5 years of cognitive aging in a way where when we take nootropics, our brains are functioning normally and vibrantly as a result. And that right there is like this great discovery. That's how I think a lot of people that are, especially cognitive biohackers and people that are really serious about taking nootropics, and some startup people included, that's how we look at it. Then when you start looking at stacks like the Cortex stack, which basically is made to target neurogenesis, this process of the brain creating new neurons, and synaptogenesis, where the brain builds more synapses and synapses function better, as well as uses the nutrients in Cortex to formulate a major cell membrane in the brain, a phosphatide called phosphatidylcholine, then we're looking at an entirely different thing. Or this is not just a stimulant, this isn't just a smart drug, or a drug that just helps you to focus, irrespective of the improvement or non-improvement of other parts of the brain. We're talking about nutrients that the brain already uses, that are in baby's formula. Uridine monophosphate and choline are in baby's formula to help the baby's brain develop. We're talking about constituents of the human brain, and that help the brain to develop in a functional capacity. What we're really looking at is we're looking at people that have a more detailed understanding of the physiology behind their brain performance in general, realizing that some of the mechanisms of their brain that underlie good performance are atrophying and declining with age, and that through the day, taking certain nootropics, they can stave off some of that decline and also just optimize from baseline those mechanisms. It's like when you really start to get to understand neurotransmitters and how one might be deficient in specific neurotransmitters, or one's diet really isn't tailored to giving them enough precursors to certain neurotransmitters, or just because you're 35 years old and you've got a lot to do and you're eating the right diet, maybe you're not absorbing certain nutrients, maybe you are, maybe you didn't sleep all that well, maybe you did, but still there's room for performance increases in the brain. Engaging in those performance increases as a result of taking nootropics is a totally ethically intelligent way of going about getting better brain performance. So I think, if anything, entrepreneurs, specifically the ones that are really into biohacking and really into kind of making their brains work better over time, really trying to prevent the aging process in the brain and put themselves in a place where every day they're functioning like they did when they were a young person, that these people are actually ahead of the curve. That you might call an entrepreneur that takes nootropics that is is really targeting better brain performance now and better brain performance in the future and staving off decline. You might call that person evolutionary. You might call that person an intelligent entrepreneur, a person that recognizes that they can target the underlying mechanisms of brain function and make them work better for the purposes of making their business enterprises work better, because they realize that at the root of everything, guys, ladies, gentlemen, at the root of it all is the functionality of your brain. So can an entrepreneur build their business faster having a better brain because they're taking nootropics? Definitely. Can an entrepreneur have a better capacity to put words together in the right way to influence a Fortune 500 CMO or CEO or IT person from a multi-billion-dollar company that they're sitting down having a meeting with? Yes. Hell yes. I've been in that situation before, and nootropics have helped me to sit down and talk to these people. Can an entrepreneur have a better capacity to sit down and focus on brainstorming and coming up with new ideas as a result of being able to sort of drown out some of that background noise because they've got a good focused nootropic and it's making their brain work well? Yes, the answer is yes, and that is totally ethical and definitely a smart idea and will facilitate the building of your business. Entrepreneurs wear many hats in building a company. You're the marketer, you're the admin person, you're the financial person, you're the operations person. And for a brain to be able to deal with that, it needs to be pretty diverse. It needs to be able to react to new things rather quickly. It needs to have fluid intelligence in some of these situations that require sort of fluid reaction. And taking nootropics and improving the brain's ability to do all of those things as a result is a great way to handle all the myriad of things that get thrown at you as an entrepreneur. Having to multitask, having to triple multitask, having to quadruple task. I mean, really having to answer the phones, pick up a phone, sell a customer. And now you have to ship a product. Now you become a shipping manager and you have to deal with tape and printing out labels and etc. Boxes. You've built the product. You took a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years or 6 months to build a product that requires your brain to work really well. At the end of the day, it's cleanup time, right? For a lot of companies, one of the companies that I own is a very, very physically demanding hands-on company. And at the end of the day, after we've done our stuff, it's an Apple products repair company. There is a mess for me to deal with, right? And it's either that day at the end of the day or the next morning that I got to have to, deal with that mess. And that's just another thing. It's like now I got to turn into janitor. I got to go into janitor mode where I clean everything up, make sure everything works great, etc. Put everything away. Don't forget anything. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to do. That back when I had one guy running the company for me, a solid dude that ended up moving on to do something else. It was so much for him to do that at the end of the day, like he would forget things. That was like one of the reasons, he eventually moved on. Pretty solid guy, but not me, and couldn't kind of keep up with the myriad of things that he needed to do to function as essentially the store manager, operations manager of this company. So it's important, guys. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to get ahead and you recognize that the difference between you making it, your startup working, you being financially successful and making this company happen and not is your brain. First of all, I applaud you for actually recognizing that. And secondly, nootropics are a great way to get your brain jump started to make that happen. Because after all, when you go all in to this business thing and you've got a company or a couple companies and you're a startup entrepreneur, nothing else matters, man. This is it. This is your life. You got $10 million somebody invested in your company, or you're bootstrapping and you got to make payroll. It's like, you got to be on your game. Brain has to work well. Nootropics are the answer to that. As a 6-year entrepreneur myself, I have a strong affinity for nootropics. Before I even decided I was going to create a nootropics company, I was very fascinated with the substances. I really, aside from productivity and trying to help me to have a better brain in business and thus to perform better, I really do think about it from this other perspective of staving off age-related decline and understanding the mechanisms that underlie good brain performance and really, really trying to optimize those mechanisms. I mean, once you get to the point where you understand which neurotransmitters particular nootropic compounds are affecting, then you really can get granular and detailed about how you're doing that and looking at each individual neurotransmitter and asking the question, is that neurotransmitter working correctly? Do I have enough of it? Is it optimized? When you get that detailed, you can really tweak nootropic stacks to work for you. And me being to that point, it's completely different for me than just trying to get an acute sort of focus enhancement. For me, it's about improving the brain one step at a time, almost like lifting weights and or taking another supplement that might work counter to the aging process or something. It's like we're really working on improving physiology here, and that's important to know. And finally, I think that there is a lot more evolution to take place. Talk about entrepreneurship and nootropics and the interplay. There's a lot more evolution that's going to take place with brain performance optimization, and it's going to be entrepreneurs that go out and make those discoveries. I am highly interested in creating a product that measures neurotransmitters a lot better than is kind of currently available on the market, because we need that, right? I mean, we can kind of gauge it and eyeball it as much as we can and want, but ultimately we're really going to need to get a lot more granular about levels of neurotransmitters, I think probably both in the gut and in the brain, and kind of how that relates to our nootropic intake and how that relates to the sort of optimal target outcome that we're going for. There are entrepreneurs out there that are working on transcranial direct current stimulation devices where you hook electrodes up to your brain and you send currents to different parts of the brain. There's all these montages or placements essentially where you put these electrodes on the brain that are supposed to stimulate the brain in specific ways to do specific things. I've tried the technology before. I gotta say I was interestingly impressed with it, and there are other entrepreneurs out there that are trying to evolve upon that technology. So that's a great example of the connection between entrepreneurship and brain performance enhancement in general. If you're an entrepreneur thinking about starting to take nootropics to get a better brain, to build your business, I'm 100% behind you, and a lot of other entrepreneurs are. It is a great idea, especially if you're working on improving the brain over the long term, which is the case with a lot of nootropics. A lot of nootropics work on the brain and make changes on the brain that are beneficial for the long term. And that is not only an admirable idea and an honorable idea, but a super intelligent idea. Right now, there are your competitors and other entrepreneurs, other startup founders right now that are taking drugs like modafinil, taking good nootropic products like aniracetam, piracetam, CDP choline, alpha GPC, the Cortex nootropic stack, huperzine A, plenty more out there to get the neurological edge, and that is awesome. And for me, nootropics hold a very, very special place in my heart. They have helped me to more rapidly build my companies. They've helped my brain to work so much better than it otherwise would have, and it's really taught me a lot about the brain's capacity to continue to improve as we age, something we didn't think was possible. That's very exciting. All right, folks, that has been the podcast. Couple things to talk about before we close this one out. On the Live Cortex blog, now we're doing Nootropics Q&As where you can email me at ryan@livecortex.com with any question you have about nootropics, and I will answer it on the air on the web. The first one's going up today, March 30th, 2016, and there's 4 questions about some pretty interesting topics. We're talking about alpha brain a little bit, talking about huperzine A and why I caution people from taking huperzine A, or at least like go into taking huperzine A with a little bit of granularity, and we talk about ashwagandha, and we also talk about super stacking and how sometimes new people in the area of nootropics are stacking entirely too many things, and it's probably messing them up, or at least it's messing their capacity to get a good result up. And so email me at ryan@livecortex.com with your questions about nootropics, and I will address them and answer them in video format on the web, on the Live Cortex blog, and on YouTube. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel on YouTube, please do. Go to YouTube and search Live Cortex, or go to the livecortex.com website, and you'll see a YouTube link on the right-hand side of the blog page, or any of the blog post pages, where you can connect to our channel and subscribe to the channel. A lot of content being put out. The Q&As about nootropics, all of these podcasts are being kind of converted into a YouTube format. I do a lot of random videos about my thoughts on nootropic. There's a lot of content out there right now that people seem to think is helpful. I've got some reviews out there about different nootropics, etc. And so please check that out. On the website, on livecortex.com, on the right-hand side, on all the blog pages, there is a opt-in form for you to give us your name and email address for us to send you links at the end of the week, or at the end of 2 weeks, or at the end of a sort of a content barrage that we put out of all the content we're putting out. This is not an email list to sell you stuff. This is an email list to send you content at the end of the week. We do not have a sort of feed burner kind of feed going on the Live Cortex blog. We want to not bombard people's email addresses every day with content and emails and sales emails. We want to basically just send you one email every 2 weeks with all the content that we created to make it a lot easier. So sign up for that on the website at livecortex.com. Go to the blog link and go to any one of the blog posts, or the blog link itself And you can subscribe for nootropics and smart drugs content, my friends. And we're going to read a quick review on the Cortex website about the Cortex Generation 1 product from a guy named Nick Stout, who wrote, "It took a bit to kick in for me." It's funny he says that because, we just sort of talked about that on the live Q&A, on the Nootropics Q&A about sort of the differentiation in onset for different people depending on your brain. So check that out. He said, but when it did, it felt like I was super zoned in. I have issues with distraction when working, and this stack basically fixes them. That's Nick Stout's comment on livecortex.com about the Cortex Generation 1 product. Snag yourself a bottle of Cortex Gen 1. It's less than $40. It's a 30 count. Serving size is 1 to 2 capsules depending on your brain. Some people take 1 capsule and they feel great. They get the verbal fluency benefits. They get the focus endurance benefits. Some people need to take 2 and that works great for them. It all is going to depend on your brain. Snag a bottle at livecortex.com. You are going to love it. It combines uridine monophosphate with CDP choline, as well as a titch of artichoke extract and some bacopa monnieri. It's a very synergistic stack, and I just came across some research that luteolin, which is a major component of artichoke extract, is procholinergic and enhances neurite outgrowth. That's the outgrowth of dendrites and axons from neurons for better cell communication. That is a big find right there. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or review us if you're so inclined, and we will talk to you next time.
Pick up a bottle of the Cortex Nootropic at www.livecortex.com.